So let me ask you this because I know that working in this arena, I've done a lot of healing, but I'm on my healing journey till the end. And, I hear stories and I'm learning so much about trauma and it can trigger me. And sometimes I need, I'm really careful about taking a break,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
from it. So you are deep in it as well. And you're hearing some really horrific stories. And so you said that's about the time that you started to do your own healing journey because you realized, oh, I haven't told my story. I would imagine that hearing those stories would have been so triggering. How did you manage that?
That's such an interesting question. So one of the things, and I write about this in my book. So one of the things about the don't be a dumb girl part was like don't cry. So I got really good at learning how not
Oh,
to cry, right? Which is like in life, that's a bad
that
thing.
is.
But what happened is it allowed me, so I've found these superpowers that I have discovered about myself where I've always had such shame about that. The ability to hold my emotions and not cry gave me the ability to interview people where I could ask them about tell me about the worst day of your life. And they could be crying and they could, snot coming out of their
Yeah.
nose kind of crying. And I can like
Shut it off.
compartmentalize and not and shut it off. And I do think a lot of abuse survivors experience this
Yes.
and can do that. Um, but anyway, so I was able to do that. And so I was with a friend of mine who was my photographer when I was doing the book. And she was a big crier, right? Emotions on her sleeve all the time. And I said to her before we went into this interview, I said, "Look, I know you cry all the time." I said, "But we have to be professional and you can cry, but you can't cry more than the person telling us the story about their
Oh,
son being killed, right?" And she's like, "Oh, right, yeah, that's kind of a good point."
yeah.
I'm like, "So keep it together just a little bit." So we go through the interview, and it was actually we were interviewing one of the women, one of the moms who lost her daughter was killed at Columbine. It was very intense. I can feel myself absorbing her energy
Yeah.
and her sadness and her grief, and which happened in every single interview I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And and I feel kind of an honor about that, like I'm lessening their grief. But
Ooh.
but to your point, like you have to do something with it. You
Yeah.
can't it can't live in you. And so we left this interview. I drove onto the highway and then got off at the next exit, and I pulled over and I said, "Kathy, are 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 you okay if I cry?" And she
Oh.
goes, What are you talking about?" And I said, I just feel like I need to cry." She said,
Oh.
"Of course you can cry." And so I started crying. And then she started crying because she easily cries. And then we're laughing that we're sitting in this car crying. And then we cry more. But anyway, what happened was I realized I have to let go of this
Mhm.
energy that I've just absorbed. I'm never going to lose all of it, but it's an important mental thing. And we talked about it after and she said, "Why did you ask me that?" And I said, "Well, I thought you would think I was a dumb girl if I was crying." And she said, "No, of course I wouldn't think that." But that was what my brain was telling me, and that it was risky to cry.
Yes.
And I didn't want her to think less of me. So that was the practice. Every single interview from that day forward, we would get in the car, we'd drive a couple blocks away, pull over, and cry. And
Oh.
it was an incredible experience because it really helped me take care of myself, and and I felt like it was a way of honoring the people
Yeah.
because it really wasn't professional for me to be crying as much as them,
Yeah.
but it needed to be released. And I think that's part of it. And I'm sure the work you do, especially on the podcast, I'm sure you just the things you hear,
Mhm.
you have to release it.
I have heard some horrific, horrific
Mm.
stories in the workshop. And I remember because I took the workshop, the original workshop that I took was through a church, and I took it many years ago. And I was a mess in the workshop listening to all the other women tell their stories. And there was like 25 of us in the group, so it was pretty big. And I was just a hot mess when I left there. I was crying the whole night, right? And and didn't sleep that night when I got home because I'm visual, so I'm visualizing all this stuff. And of course I'm also thinking as I'm hearing these other stories, well, these people have it much worse than me, you know. And so a few years
Yeah, why do we do that? Why do we compare?
I know.
I
It's like, oh, their story's much worse. What
isn't
am I
it
crying
cur-
about?
ugh.
No. But
Right.
about a few years later, the woman that headed up the workshop and created it reached out to me and a friend and asked us to take it over. She was going to retire. And one of the conversations we had, because both of us are empaths and both of us can cry easy, is how the heck are we going to get through the first night hearing these women's stories and not crying? I can't cry for you and not cry for you. I can't cry. Like you said, somebody's got to have it together for these women and be the strong one. And I'm
Right,
like,
yeah.
how are we going to do this? And I will tell you, I did that particular workshop for 8 years and not one time did I cry. Now, I will say this, I didn't sleep that night. Didn't sleep at all.
Yeah.
And had to release it myself the same way and cry and all that. But you're right. I think we do actually learn. And I'm so emotional. I can cry pretty easily, but I can shut it off. But when I look back, when I had been at the beginning of my healing, I completely shut that down. That was a weakness in my eyes. And I was afraid if I started crying, I wouldn't
right.
stop.
Well, it's interesting because then I learned this thing, right? Like I've got to get it out. I need to cry, and it was really helpful. And then when I was doing the film, I was had two cameramen that flew all over the country with me as we filmed people asking about when they shot and killed somebody. So one of the stories is a family in North Carolina. The 8-year-old son found the mom's gun and accidentally killed his 5-year-old little brother. And so we flew out to film and talk to this family, and it was 10 years after the shooting, so they had some time to reflect on what had happened. So the boy was now 18. But I remember coming away from the interview, and it was, again, just so tragic, and listening to this 18-year-old boy explain what he had been through and the tragedy of it, and the guilt and the shame and there's no help group that you can go to for that kind of thing. So we pull away, and I said to my two cameramen who were guys, and I said, "Hey, do you guys want me to like pull over in a couple miles and we can cry?" They looked at me like I was insane. They were like, "Wait, what? No, we're good." And I was like,
well, I
"Oh,
need a
gee,
minute."
Okay. Right. So I was like, okay, this is going to be a hotel Heidi by herself in her hotel room situation. But so it got delayed, but it was still a part of my process. And it was kind of a bummer that we couldn't do that together, because when Kathy and I did it, my photographer, it was so helpful. And it was this really cool bonding moment. And then every time we would laugh before we would do it. Right. And it was just kind of a bummer that I couldn't do this with these guys. And I think we're seeing that in our culture too, right? This men not being able to, this hyper like masculinity, and men not really being able to take care of their emotional needs, because if I'm feeling like I can't cry because of my upbringing and being tough and not being girly, then like, what are guys going to do? Right. And it's too bad is what it is.
Yeah. We've really done a disservice to our boys. I mean, we've really, this thing of sucking it up, buttercup, don't cry, and rub some dirt on it, you're fine. And, be angry. And we've really done a disservice. It's interesting. I had, when I went to counseling one time with my ex-husband, I had a counselor one time say to me, men and women have the same emotions. We have the same emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Men just aren't allowed to show them, except for anger, But we all have the same emotions. We all feel the same emotions, and we need to release those emotions. And that's one thing that's, I'm so glad you're sharing that, because, about, having to pull over and cry and release this, because I can't even imagine, you know, and it's funny because I did the same thing with the workshop, you know, to release it. And I didn't even realize that that's until really kind of now that that's what I was really kind of doing. But, you know, that's something in the trauma arena that I have thought about too, is like, we don't stop and think about the effects of that police officer that had to shoot that person, you know, and what he or she
right.
had to live with as a result. They didn't want to do that.